Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, an informational and educational show for those affected by prenatal alcohol exposure, their loved ones, and anyone else wanting to learn more about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. So, today I am bringing to you a colleague in the FASD world, Mr. Carl Young, who's joining us from North Dakota, where I'm sure it's a whole lot chillier than where I am in Central California. But he has so much experience and so much to say, and I'm sure that you will really get a lot out of today's conversation. Carl, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's actually 40 degrees here right now, and there's almost
Oh,
zero wind. So it's
okay,
um
balmy.
it's balmy. It's short sleeve and shorts and flip-flops, whatever. Yeah.
I remember I remember going with my husband and my mother in the motorhome to Glacier National Park
Oh yes.
in Montana.
Mhm.
And it was probably 62, 63 degrees out.
Yep.
We've got sweatshirts on, not coats, but
No.
another layer.
Yep.
And there's people going down the water slide in their
Yes.
swimsuits. And I'm like, oh no, that's some serious adjustment to weather.
Oh yes. As soon as the ice is all the way gone on the river, there will be people out in their boats, no
Oh,
matter how cold it is outside. Yeah.
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 Well, I think we'll just stay inside for now.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, Carl, tell me a little bit about what drew you to your interest in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
My family and I adopted a little boy in 2003 who was born substance exposed. And we didn't know the extent of his issues
Mhm.
early on. We didn't get a whole birth history and all of that. We got basic birth history. And then we started dealing with major mental health issues when he was 4 and 5, and he was on adult doses of some of his meds. And then
Wow.
through the progression of his condition and his deterioration of his mental health, we, I think over time, we've had upwards of 20 different diagnoses at any one time.
Mhm.
And he'd even been diagnosed with autism. Um, and then finally, when he was 15, we saw a specialist who said, well, this is, I've seen his birth records, and this is, alcohol related neurodevelopmental,
Okay.
so which is a subset of FASD. And I'd been advocating for 10 years at that point for more increased pediatric mental health care in North Dakota.
Mhm.
So I began to learn everything I could learn about fetal alcohol and started advocating for that.
Yeah.
Um, and it was something a lot of people still don't talk about. We can't
Yeah.
talk about that. We need to talk about that.
Yeah, we
So
do.
yeah, that's a conversation that every school, every social worker should have a part in.
Mhm.
And I think at some point there needs to be a specialization in the field
I
to
would
work
love
with
to
those
see that.
kids. Yeah,
Yeah. I would love to see that. I mean, when for a couple reasons. One is the shame and stigma that goes
yeah,
around with alcohol use. So you've got women giving birth who are drug screened, and the
yeah,
kids are have tox screens immediately.
yeah,
They tend to confess to only that which they have to
right,
because of the drug test.
right,
Why take on that additional shame
right,
of alcohol, and why should the system ask about that if it's legal?
right. What they
And
don't know though is alcohol is more harmful on that developing fetus than even meth is,
yeah,
which I
or
was
heroin. Mhm.
shocked to learn. You could buy the most hardcore street drug, and unless it actually kills them, it's not nearly as harmful on the developing baby as alcohol is.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was shocked when I first learned that. So,
yeah, yeah.
um, and it's been a struggle because we've had caseworkers say, that diagnosis isn't going to change his care plan, so why bother? Well,
I've
that's
heard
the
that too.
we need that diagnosis, And if there's no care plan that includes that diagnosis, we need to change how those care plans are built.
Yeah. Yeah.
Simple as that.
And the other piece of that is because it's a whole body diagnosis, it's
yes.
not just about development.
Yes.
It's not just about intellect.
No.
There's so much to it, so many things that come about either directly because of the alcohol exposure or that we run the higher risk of developing because of the alcohol exposure. So it in essence is part of our medical history that every individual has a right to know about.
Right. Well, and there's examples of that. You know, if you look at me having prenatal alcohol exposure when I was born 52 years ago, and I've had for the last 27 years numerous health issues that nobody can explain. I have systemic lupus, which mostly affects 95% of the people that are affected by it are black women between the ages of 20 and 50. And I'm not a black woman, and at the time I was 27, and nobody could figure out how I developed that condition. And then the myriad of disorders since then that, because lupus is what we call a hitchhiker disease. You never just have lupus. And then last fall, I was diagnosed with there's something called cirrhosis of the liver, stage 4. And I'm not a drinker, I'm not a heavy drinker. So, and everybody's like, well, how did you get that if you don't drink? That's the luck of the draw.
So you can have a predominant cause, but it's not exclusive.
My predominant cause was fatty liver, which is a genetic trait. So, at least in my family, it's a genetic trait.
Yeah.
But they can't say that was the definitive cause. But, it is what it is.
My grandmother had lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life. So.
My mom was a heavy drinker for all but the last 24 years of her life. And it ended up being COVID that took her, not cirrhosis.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
She did develop cirrhosis, but she mostly lived with it for 24 years.
Yeah. But kudos to her if she quit drinking upon the diagnosis.
She did.
My mom has emphysema and COPD, but don't think about taking away her cigarettes.
Oh, no, my mom had COPD, and she didn't give up smoking until she went into nursing home care.
Yeah.
And then it was still a struggle. So,
yeah. I don't fight her on it because I don't want her last months to be full of arguments.
There's bigger battles.
But I did put my back up and say, I'm not going to the store yet.
No.
Yesterday. I'll get there. You'll get them, but not right now.
Yes, this is so true. But the more I learn about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, any of them that fall under that umbrella, the more I wish I had parented my son differently. And there's the book Try Differently Rather Than Harder. And that's a lot of it, but it's so much more than that, because everything that we experienced with him, all the times that he tried to kill me over the years, was a symptom of something else. It wasn't him actually trying to kill me. It was a symptom of the disorder. And I didn't start thinking that way until after he was out of my house. And now I have PTSD and severe anxiety, and I struggle when I hear his voice. Yet I'm the only one in the family that he talks to. So it is what it is. And I will always be available to him if he needs me. But unfortunately, he can't live in my house.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a father's love.
Well, I was adopted by my father when I was 3. So I know what it's like to struggle with identity, and I know what it's like to, wish for normal. And I've always tried to give that to him. He's always known he's adopted because he's African American, and I'm not, and my wife isn't. And I always used to get a kick out of the people. I thought, he looks just like you. Well, thank you. You know, we have a
Because
gene in the family.
somebody dipped you in the bleach, right?
Yeah, we have a gene in the family, you know, the 2% Native American and 2% African American somewhere down the line, and all of a sudden that gene popped out, and here he is. You know, and that's the way people would accept it as an answer, because at the time he was a special needs baby just because he was African American. In North Dakota, people did not adopt mixed race children, and we did.
Yeah.
But we fell in love with this little boy, and he
Mhm.
became ours, heart and soul. So,
Mhm.
and I spent his whole life fighting for his care, and it
So
became
how
as
old,
natural as breathing.
yeah, how old was he when he was diagnosed?
Uh, he was almost 15 years old. It was in
Mhm.
June of his 14th year, and he turns 15. Yeah, would have been probably a month shy of his 15th birthday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And you figured out your place on the spectrum at what age?
51.
Okay.
So,
I was 56
yeah.
at the
Uh,
time. So
I asked my wife, you know, do you think it's possible I have FASD? Oh, that's a no-brainer, she says. So, and I never really thought about it, but I used to tell my son, or our son, that, you know, the only person who can make a change in your life is you. And you have to decide you want it, and want it bad enough to never waver from that change. And he told me I didn't know what I was talking about. And then I took the Facets introduction course, and I took a course from Jeff Noble, and I started looking at my life, and I do know what I'm talking about, because I see so many similarities between my son and I.
yeah.
Um, and the things that I learned through the process of wanting more information about fetal alcohol,
Mhm.
is that I very much was exposed. We did a preliminary assessment, and we have another follow-up appointment with a specialist to get the formal diagnosis, but I'm confident in saying that I have
Yeah.
prenatal alcohol exposure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm also in the self-identified camp.
yeah.
Simply because I see myself all over the map in
Mhm.
looking at the characteristics. And my mother then said, "Yeah, I drank every day."
Yeah. It's, you know, it's in the 60s and 70s, it was normal.
Yeah.
So,
So, so out of that, you've been advocating. Where do you see the greatest need in terms of people that really need to know this stuff?
oh, these, you know, our son was in and out of residential facilities 6 times over the course of his life.
Mhm.
And
You just went all purple.
I see that. Let me change it. There we go.
Ah, you're
I don't
back.
know why. Weird. Um, and the facilities would more often than not pronounce him cured and send him home.
Mm,
And we, you know, 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever later, we'd be back in the same struggles and having
mhm,
to shuttle to a psych hospital for a stay, or do a med
mhm.
wash, or all of these things. Um, so I said, you know, this has got to be something more.
Yeah.
And the one facility he was at in Montana said, this is not autism. We don't know what this is, but it's not autism. And they
Mhm.
had him in their autism unit. They said he might have autism, but that's not what we're looking at.
It's
So
partial,
it's, yeah.
a partial
Um,
diagnosis.
and they said they ended up sending him home without completing the treatment, even though they wanted to keep him there. Insurance refused, said
Mm,
that he needed more, he needed to go home.
mhm.
And anytime they discharge to family, it's considered a success regardless of the cause for discharge.
That's crazy.
Yes. Yeah. And
Mm,
that was when we first started exploring the possibility, you know, if it's not autism, what else
what
could
is
it
it?
be? You know,
Mhm.
so I started looking at the drug history that we knew, the little bit that we knew about. And I talked to our social worker through the state, and I said, what other conditions are there that could be affected by drug exposure? And she said, well, there's fetal alcohol, but that diagnosis won't get you anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, okay, who do we talk to?
So
we got her to give us a referral to a specialist, and that specialist ordered up his birth records from his biological name and said, oh yeah, he's got this alcohol related neurodevelopmental. Yep. So the whole system of pediatric mental health care needs to know about this. From social workers to doctors. It's a conversation everybody needs to have.
Yeah.
But largely there's no funding for any of it.
Right. I'm hoping that there will be some kind of difference from the Fetal Alcohol, the FASD Respect Act.
Yes.
That FASD United has been championing for several years. Hopefully this time it will pass.
In December, it'll be 4 years that we've been advocating for it.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a lot of that work in North Dakota on behalf of FASD United. It would be a boon to every state in the country for that to pass.
So I think the first time I ran across your name, Carl, was when you had done some statewide activism in North Dakota. What was that legislation, and what does it accomplish?
Been a registered lobbyist, initially talking about mental health for about 10 years. And last year, we have our legislature meets on the odd year, so every biennium they meet for 80 days. So a year ago, when they met, I had five bills introduced that were eventually called down into one. It's the first legislation that had been introduced since I think 2006, and it's the only legislation that's ever passed. And what we ended up getting, we asked for a task force for fetal alcohol. We asked for an entry for FASD in the list of diagnoses for the individual education plan. And then we asked for a FASD Day of Awareness. And then we asked for FASD to be included in the state definition of developmental disability. And then we asked for mandatory 5 hours a year annual training for all foster parents.
Nice.
We accomplished the definition. So FASD is in our state's definition of developmental disability. And we accomplished the Day of Awareness. Everything else we didn't. We did get a cross disability advisory council out of the deal, but that's not an FASD task force. It covers all childhood disabilities. So, which is not a bad thing. But we were the first, or I was the first person to get introduced and passed any kind of legislation on FASD ever. And first person to make it out of committee ever.
Well, kudos to you for all the hard work that I knew went into that.
Oh, yes. We had some bizarre arguments against, things like the training. We had some social workers that came and said they know everything there is to know about FASD. And I raised a child with FASD, and having FASD myself, I still don't know everything there is to know about FASD. So, not to say that they don't, but I'm skeptical. So, yeah.
As well, you should be.
Yeah. So we're gearing up for next session, and we have a list of things we're going to ask for, and those things we're going to push for, and we'll hope for the best turnout. But it's and it's not just my voice anymore. I have the voices of the families that I work with that are being added to that. So I think we'll have a greater impact this session than we did last session.
Well, if my husband ends up being transferred to Western North Dakota, then I will join you in championing those efforts.
Well,
So,
I would appreciate that. The more voices, the better. And I tell people, you don't have to be an expert at speaking. If you write down your story on a piece of paper, get up there and read it out loud to the committee, that's enough.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So you don't need to know facts or figures. They want to hear your personal story.
yeah,
I can give them facts and figures all day long, but yeah, they need stories too.
yeah, yeah. So I know you're hard at work on another project these days.
Oh yes. Well, a
Um,
few.
okay. Well, where do you want to start?
Um, well, I was lucky enough to hook up with a team of people from Minnesota that are as passionate about FASD as I am.
Mhm.
Not to say that others in the FASD community aren't passionate, because I haven't met anybody that has no
Right,
passion.
right.
But this group of people came together around a common goal of using different methods to increase awareness of FASD.
Mhm.
Things like a book and a documentary and
Yeah.
online learning tools
And a feature
and
film.
in a feature film and all of
Mhm.
these things. So um, as a part of that, I'm working with a gentleman named Joel, who
Mhm.
I think you've met.
I've
And
yeah, I've met and I have interviewed him for this podcast. Yeah,
yes, and
yeah,
he
delightful man.
we started working on the CEU portion of I do a monthly lunch and learn training for social workers. And he was helping me with the CEU portion of that so we can get
Okay.
CEUs built. Um, and we started talking, and I said we should really write a textbook, because
Mhm.
the textbooks that are out there, and I have two, are really quite dry. He
Yeah,
told me I could use them for a pillow. There's no family stories in there. There's no
yeah,
doctor anecdotes in there or any of those things. It's all facts and research.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
said those things are important, but you also need to incorporate the family.
They're important, but they're lifeless.
Right. So we got to working on that, and then we started talking about, why don't we just write a book just for the parents initially? And I said, well, is one book enough? So now we have a series of books, and we work on it about 2 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week on
Mhm.
Zoom. Um, and we're looking at having a preliminary draft before the Seattle conference in April.
Oh, nice.
So yes, I don't know if we're going to be done with it by then, but we'll at least have a preliminary draft.
Yeah.
We managed to write between 3,000 and 5,000 words a day, which is a significant number of words, and this is
Mhm.
collaborative. So
Mhm.
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder how much I'm actually uh, uh, pushing in the cause, and if it's not more Joel than me, but so, but I think he would say the same thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's going to be a series of books on FASD in the brain. And it's
Mhm.
called a tentative title is Embracing Neurodiversity.
Mhm.
So, because FASD is a neurodiverse condition like autism or
Yeah.
ADHD,
And yet it keeps getting left off the list.
and it keeps getting left off the list. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm a fellow at the University of Utah for the University of Utah's regional um, learning and education program,
Mhm.
and their focus is neurodiversity, and their primary focus in neurodiversity is autism.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I've raised kids with autism. I know what autism is, but you really need to add fetal alcohol to
Yeah.
this list.
Yeah.
So it's far more prevalent than autism.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Over
well,
over twice as often as
yes,
common.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're not ready to do that yet.
Yeah.
So, you need to be ready, because
Yeah.
if you figure roughly one child in every classroom in the country is affected by this, and most
Easily.
of them are undiagnosed,
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
significant portion of our population.
Yeah.
And if we don't work with them now, we're raising the next generation of substance use disorders.
Right. Right.
And that's going to continue to tax the system into
Yeah.
perpetuity if we
Yeah.
don't deal with it now.
Yeah. And that's why I wrote my book, Sip by Sip, is to try and reach those who were never diagnosed,
Yeah.
when they were younger and never found a an explanation that really fit
Right.
for their struggles in life.
Yes.
Like I had all kinds of reasons for my struggles in life, but there was that gnawing thing
Nothing
in the
that
back
really
of my
hit.
mind that said, that's not quite it.
Yeah.
Right. And until, the wool was pulled
Yeah.
away, and it's like, oh,
Well, it was
um,
like flipping a light switch when I got to realizing that, I have this condition
yeah,
and, it's not a life ender, you know, but
yeah,
coming to that awareness, it it was like pulling a cloud away from my brain,
yeah, yeah.
for lack of a better description.
I
Um,
often use the analogy of what it's like when you get your cataracts out.
I've never had cataracts, but
Well, but you wear but you
but
wear
but
glasses,
I do wear
right?
glasses.
You
Yeah.
wear glasses. So if
Yes.
you go for weeks or months without putting them on, you're used to the blurriness of it. You're used
Yes.
to all the blurriness of life. And then you put them on and it's like, oh, you can
Yeah.
see,
What does
right?
that say? And I'm
Yeah.
losing my hearing. I have neurosensory hearing loss in both ears, but I was born deaf. Um, so I'm always asking my wife to repeat herself. She's like, turn it up. I'm like, I don't qualify for hearing aids yet. But I said it
Yeah.
would also be helpful if you wouldn't talk to me through the wall. And coming up with a diagnosis of, or finding out that or coming to the realization that I have FASD at
Mhm.
some level is like her coming around the corner and talking to me directly and not talking to me through that wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's made a huge difference. And it also
Yeah.
explains so many things about the way I was as a kid. All of the
Mhm.
fighting and the stealing and the lying and stuff that I did. And
Yeah.
then my mom thought I was going crazy, so she put me in psych when I was 17, and I'd been working in the oil fields up by Williston at the time, um, doing well pad teardown. And I came home for a visit, and she thought I was going crazy, so she locked me away. And my probation officer came in, and she said, you have a choice, and you have two paths in life, and one of them involves prison, and one doesn't. And I said, I don't want to go to prison. So what's the other path? And she said, this involves you leaving home and going into a group home for kids or for teenagers and living there for 9 months to a year
Mhm.
and figuring your life out. And so I said, let's do that.
Yeah.
And that was the best decision I ever made. Right after that, I got out when I left the group home. I graduated high school and then I worked for 3 months and then I joined the Army.
Mhm.
And that was when the first Gulf War hit. So, and those two decisions, putting myself in the group home and then joining the military, I will never regret doing either one of those two.
So being in the Gulf War, I'm sure you were exposed to a lot of traumatic events.
I didn't
So
actually make it to the sandbox, which is what we called it.
yeah.
But I know a lot of people who did experience those things. But even being stateside, you get exposed to things in the military that are rough.
Mhm.
I thought I knew what racism was, and I had no idea until I
Mhm.
went to basic training what racism is. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
no. Um, and then training, I was responsible for all this heavy military trucks because I was a truck driver. And we taught officers how to drive these big semis and anything that is something that's big enough to haul a 50-ton tank.
Mhm.
That was a different experience because nobody had trusted me like that before, ever. So
Yeah.
But yes,
So
and go
with
ahead.
you said you had a couple projects, one of which is, getting these textbooks out with Joel, along
Yeah.
with Joel. Um, and part of it is, how does that tie in with the Embracing Zach trilogy of projects, right? There's, because I mean, that's kind of what it is, right? It's a trilogy. First, you have the book, then you have the feature film that brings in a different audience, and then you have the documentary, which brings in yet another audience. How do the CEUs come into that?
Well, the CEUs came about, was approached last. Well, we had asked for all foster parents to be trained annually for 5 hours a year in FASD.
Mhm.
The head of child services for the Department of Health and Human Services approached me and said, "Can you do a monthly hour-long session on FASD for social?"
Mhm.
And we worked with our state's Developmental Disability Council and put together a proposal for that. And that started in uh, October. And at the first session, the social worker said, "Can we get CEUs for that?" And I had no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
So I started looking into it, and I was on a call with Joel, and he said, "Well, let's work on it. We can put together the documentation and stuff that you need, and go from there." And he'd already been working on the documentary.
Mhm.
He'd interviewed me for that about 3 years ago when I spoke at an event in Grand Forks on FASD. And then so we got to working on it, and we're still working on it. We've submitted some of the paperwork for the first 6 months of the training, in order to see what they say, and they've not responded yet. So
Okay.
I'm not a social worker, so I imagine that they're going, or a clinician of any kind. So I imagine they're initially going to deny the CEUs,
Mhm.
but then we'll appeal the process and work in collaboration with the clinician or a social worker or
Yeah.
whatever we need
Yeah.
in order to get them approved.
Yeah.
Um, the social workers that I've been working with averages about 110 people a month, and they're
Mm.
never the same. So
That's awesome.
yes,
That's
and
awesome.
we're recording them and putting them up so people can watch them again if they
Mhm.
want to watch them again or for the
Mhm.
first time. But I have people complain I don't put enough information in my slides, and I said, well, the slides are not
They're
speaking point,
supplemental.
they're supplemental.
Yeah.
So when I send out the slide deck, I also send all of my notes, and all of my notes are research backed. So,
Mhm.
and I make sure to confirm that everything is correct
Yeah.
research wise the Friday before the training session, so that I can make sure that they're as up to date as possible.
Yeah.
So I always send all of that information out. And so Joel said, well, geez, we have the beginnings of a textbook for schools here.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let's do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then about 3 weeks ago, we started talking about developing a series just for parents to help them
Mhm.
understand neurodiversity.
Yeah.
And the first book is on the 10 brain domains.
Mhm.
We're about halfway through that development. And um, it's just been phenomenal. I've learned so much
Mhm.
going through this
Mhm.
project with Joel.
Yeah.
We're still working on the textbook for schools, but we want to get out at least the first book in the parent series,
Yeah.
because we think it's very necessary. And
Yeah.
we don't talk about just FASD, although FASD is our focus. We talk about autism and
Mhm.
ADHD.
Mhm. Mhm.
We use Zach as we use some of the stories,
Yeah. Yeah.
based on Zach, and we have a couple of other teens that we base stories on. And
Just
most
so,
of
just excuse me one moment, just so the viewers and listeners know, Zach is the central character in this trilogy of projects called Embracing Zach.
yeah, Yep.
which
And
does educate the viewer or reader on more than just FASD, but on many different forms of neurodiversity. But
yeah,
Zach is the central character, and he does have FASD.
yes. And I've not read the in any of the initial drafts of the book, but I've seen bits and pieces of the screenplay for the book.
Mhm.
So, and Joel says, I'm a filmmaker, not a writer or a speaker.
Yeah,
And so he sees things through that view, that lens.
yeah,
And that lens is helpful when you're writing a book too.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
because he sees things that I don't see, and I see things that he doesn't see, and
Right,
together
right.
we're making a pretty good team.
Yeah,
But I'm excited about the possibilities that are going to come out of this for learning opportunities for people.
yeah, yeah.
And then
I
Joel
am
says,
too.
once we get going on this, we're going to need a speaker to go out and speak about this. And he said,
Mhm.
that's not me. And I'm like,
Who?
I don't, I'm an introvert. I don't generally like being around people, but I have the ability to communicate. And I'm not sure where it came from. I'm not sure how I developed it, but I have the ability to share information and
Yeah,
knowledge and tell stories that are impactful
yeah.
and
It's
you
when your
know,
passion comes out,
yeah,
your passion for the topic just kind of takes over and
yes,
gives you that dose of confidence that you need.
right. When
Yeah.
I had each of my kids take speech, and the join the speech and debate team in high school
Uh-huh.
for, you got to do it 1 year. Give me
Yeah.
1 year. After that, you don't have to do it anymore, but you need to do 1 year.
Yeah.
And all four of the five did it for 6 years.
Wow. Good for
And
them.
public speaking, if you can do anything to learn how to be a public speaker or
Yeah.
experience that or develop it,
Yeah.
that is a skill that will live with you forever. So,
Yeah, for me, it's kind of funny when I finished my bachelor's of social work back in 89, no, 87. And I was thinking, and I felt the call of God. So I was toying with the idea of doing a dual master's, social work and theology.
mhm,
And until I read that I would have to do a practicum, right? An internship. And I'm like, me behind a pulpit? Oh, no, no, no. God, you got the wrong girl. Nope, 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 not doing it. And 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 I know he was just looking down like, that's what she thinks.
right? Yes. Well, and I worked. I was a truck driver for a while, and I was a construction worker for a while, and then I got laid off right after my wife and I's first child was born, and
Mhm.
I said, maybe I'll try college because up till then everybody told me I'd never make it through college. And I initially started as wanted to be a history teacher at the high school,
Mhm.
and I had a student teaching experience at the high school and said, that's just not going to happen. Um,
But and I started college at 16. It
yeah,
was the yuppie version of running away from home.
yeah,
Academically, I was ready, but there's no way in Hades a 16-year-old knows what they want to do in life, even if they're neurotypical.
right.
There's just you don't have the
Too many
experience to know
variables.
what's going to be a good fit.
Yeah,
And so, but I had to stay full time in order to stay on my dad's insurance because diabetes is a very expensive disease.
yes.
So I kept changing my majors, and with that, changing my schools and losing credits along the way. By the time I started my junior year, I had over 110 credits,
Mhm.
which is enough to graduate with.
Yep. I've got enough credits. I could get one more year of school. I could be a history teacher.
Yeah.
Um,
But there's no wasted education, truly.
no, there's not. But I switched to computers. I had bought a computer from my brother in order to be able to write my college papers on.
Mhm.
And
And
they said,
now you're writing CEU proposals
I'm writing CEU
and textbooks.
proposals. Yes. And the the bizarre thing about it is they said it wasn't upgradable, and I upgraded that computer. And you know,
Yeah.
and then I got a job working tech support for Gateway Computers, phone support,
Mm-hmm.
and things just snowballed from there. So I ended up with a computer major. Um, I graduated after almost 4 years. I graduated with a 2-year degree in computers. So, and it wasn't because I hated school. I actually really liked school. But then I started teaching at the college right after that graduation. And then I went and got a 4-year degree in computers, and I started teaching at that university before I was done with the program too. You're really good at this. Can you teach the classes you're in? Well,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then I got my master's in information systems management and started teaching college full time, and I just never looked back.
Yeah.
And then
Are you
for a
still
while,
teaching?
yes, but not in a college.
Okay.
I teach every day. I just don't teach professionally. Well,
Okay.
yeah. I'm always telling stories and facts and figures, and
Okay.
this is just a different form of that.
Yeah.
But once I got to school, was hired on to help the school get a 4-year program going. And once we got it going, I was like, oh. So a friend of mine and I formed a nonprofit consulting firm that helped businesses align their technology to their mission. And then I got very sick in 13 and ended up on disability, and I've been on disability since. But yeah, it's not bad for a guy that's an introvert and doesn't like people. Yeah.
Well, it's about as odd as, 24 years in child welfare and not being a kid person.
Yeah. I know people like that. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
fear
I
the
work with
next,
parents.
yeah. Well, my wife is a special ed teacher by trade. She taught in a reservation school for 10 years. She's works as a parent aide now for the county human service zone, and she works to keep families together. And she sees a lot of kids with fetal alcohol being bounced from foster home to foster home.
Yeah.
And what they
Yeah, because the
really,
parents aren't prepared.
they're not. And I blame the system, because the system isn't preparing them for the kids that they're
Right.
dealing with.
Right. But see, that's because they're not aware,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Because you can't, none of us knew what we didn't know until we finally learned it.
Yes. I
Right.
wasn't born with knowledge.
You weren't?
No. I like to think I was for a long time. As a teenager, I knew everything about everything, and there was
What
nothing
teen
you're going to
doesn't?
teach me. But I've come to the realization as I've gotten older that there's very little that I know, and every day I'm learning something new. And that's the thing that we need to get through to the system.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
you've not experienced this.
When it comes to FASD, we have not just one system, we have multiple systems in society that are a bunch of flat earthers.
Yes, exactly. Silos of care, we call it.
Yeah.
Because we're a farm state, and every farmer used to have a grain silo.
Yeah.
And everybody had their own grain, and nobody shared anything. So we have silos of care in North Dakota.
Yeah.
And we're trying to break that paradigm, because if we can't get cross system care, nothing's going to change.
Right.
Right. We have I talked to a lady that runs a ministry in the prisons. It's called Ministry on the Margins, and she said she knows my son that has the fetal alcohol, because she met him in prison. And she said there are so many marks in prison that you would not believe it.
Yeah.
And I would believe it, and that's not where they belong. We need to hold them accountable, but prison is not the place to do that. They're not learning anything.
Right.
They're not capable of learning anything. At least not like we want them to.
Although at least they have a structured environment.
That's the thing. I know
which
where
is
he is
hard
when
to get outside.
Yes.
So we need to come up with that meet in the middle
the last facility it was pronounced cured in when he was still a teenager said you need to structure your home like a facility. And how do you do that? I don't have full-time staff in my house. It's just my wife and I and 5 kids.
Yeah.
And I'm sure not going to require the other 4 kids to act like staff. That's not their job.
Right.
Their job is to be a kid.
Right. Right.
So, and then when people would come to the house and see locks on all the cupboards or, things like that, or signs, because we had signs everywhere. We had 3 and 5 word instruction sets on a laminated paper up on the wall for different instruction sets that we wanted him to follow. And those worked, but what typical family would live like that?
Right. Right. But you do what you have to do to help
Yes.
your son succeed.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do evening sessions with parents across North Dakota every quarter, where I make a road trip up to 6 locations. And one of the evening sessions has a social worker that's adopted 4 kids with FASD. And he said, I had no idea that things were going to be like this. And I said, do you regret adopting? And he said, oh, no, I don't. I regret that the system can't help them.
Yeah. And really, that's what drew me to learn about FASD in the first place, because I was so tired of watching kids fall through the cracks
Yes. And
and
the
end up
cracks
on the
don't have to be
streets
very big. Yeah.
because they've aged out.
Yes.
You know.
And the kids with any kind of neurodiversity are amongst the most trafficked individuals in the world.
Yeah.
Because they're vulnerable.
Yeah. Very, very, very vulnerable.
I'm pretty sure that my son has been a drug mule hauling drugs from Michigan to North Dakota. I can't verify that, but I'm fairly certain he has. Because he'll admit that he has very few friends, and all of a sudden this new friend will take him on a road trip to Michigan and bring him back. And I'm like, what do they have you hauling? Nothing. Well, I was born early in the morning, but it
But
wasn't
not
this
that
morning.
early.
Yeah, it was at 8:05 a.m., March 11th, 1972. So, so yeah, it wasn't this morning.
Yeah.
But I can't live his life for him, just like he can't live mine for me.
Yeah.
All I can do is try to get the system to change enough to be able to accommodate his needs.
Well, I certainly appreciate all the efforts you've put into making North Dakota a more supportive place.
Well, they say
For
you do what you do until you find out what you were meant to do. And then that becomes your life's work.
yeah. Yeah.
The good Lord willing, I'll be here for another 25 or 30 years. But this is my life's work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel
I-
much the same way. I don't
I
want to
would have
see 25 more years though.
no, I would I would have never I would have never expected this when I started this journey.
Yeah.
That I would be this passionate about something.
Yeah.
But and then people ask, if you knew in 2003 what you knew now about your son, would you adopt him? Oh yeah. 2 reasons. Every child deserves a family. And if I knew then what I knew now or know now, his whole life would be different.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
In the end, yeah, it's been a journey, and it's been an incredible.
Yeah. Carl, I'm so thankful that you came on to spend this time with me on living with FASD. I think hopefully everyone watching or listening is taking away as much from this conversation as I am. I'm
Well, the
very
only
appreciative.
I appreciate that. And the only thing I would add is if you have FASD and you're finding it late in life, you need to keep on top of your health. You
Yes.
will develop you will develop chronic health implications, at some point, and you need to be aware of that.
And
Nobody knows your body better than you do.
yeah, I think we tend to get those diseases that are more or conditions that are more common in older populations at an earlier age.
Yes.
And I think, okay, so we're not going to wrap up quite yet because this is a fascinating topic.
I have time.
Thanks, Carl. But I think in part because it takes so much psychic energy to get done the things that most people take for granted,
Yes.
right? It's everything just takes that much more focus. And of course, everyone comes to their particular set of challenges with a unique set of strengths and gifts and talents that they use, as part of the accommodations, part of the workarounds. It's always easier to build on those things that you're already good at.
Yes.
But it doesn't stop the physical toll that
No.
all the extra energy being consumed takes.
Yes. Yes.
It there's a meme that I oftentimes share with people that are burning out, right? It's a drawing of a battery and a stick figure of a girl, and the very bottom of the battery is red, and the bottom, like, just above the ankles on the girl is red, and it says, "You wouldn't let your batteries run down this far."
Right.
You
Yes.
know,
Very
but
much so.
but we don't always have that choice.
Yep.
But we give our all to get through and a lot of us put on a mask, right? The appearance of normalcy,
Hmm.
that in itself is exhausting.
Yes.
And it's why our kids, if they can make it through the school day, they completely fall apart at home,
Yes.
because home is the safe place
Exactly.
to let
Yep.
their guard down and
Yep.
just go, ah,
Yes.
right? But we do the same thing as adults even if we're holding it together behavior wise, it's still coming out at the seams in other ways.
Yes.
Whether it's
Exactly.
the heart issues because we are predisposed to cardiac issues, whether it's, all the other organs, because the first two systems that come on board when in our creation is the gut and the central nervous system.
Yep.
And the gut also takes a hit,
Yes, it does.
you know.
I've had half a dozen heart events and 4 mini strokes in the last 15 years that nobody can explain because there's no blockages in either.
Yeah.
And all of these other conditions like the lupus and the cirrhosis, and even though I'm not a drinker, my liver's failing and there's not a thing I can do about it. you know um but yes, we need, implore you, if you have FASD, take care of your health,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
because you only get one go through life.
And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's a part of our medical history.
Oh yes, very much
And
so.
and the importance of it is, if doctors have that information, they might look at more options or more explanations to
Yes.
find out what's really going on.
Yes. Well, I can remember when I was 15 being accused of being a heavy drinker, because of my liver enzyme tests when my mom put me through treatment the first time. And I wasn't a drinker, you know. And
Yeah.
by the time I left there a week later, I was, consuming a liter of Jack Daniels every day just to get through my day. I wasn't, but I told them that I was because they'd stop bugging me about lying to them. So, so I'm like, I'm not lying. Well, the first sign of being an
Would
alcoholic is lying about your usage.
would that be confabulation?
Yes, very much so. Very much so, and I was an expert at it, but I didn't recognize that in my own son because I didn't recognize it in myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, But I should let you get back to your life and your daily routine. Maybe close out this segment for now.
Yeah, I probably should turn my attention to the home study I'm in the middle of writing.
Oh yes, oh yes, I know how that is.
Get another
Um,
family on board to be foster parents.
we always
So,
need more foster parents. Yeah,
yeah,
they are a blessing in disguise.
absolutely. Thank you for your time today, Carl.
Well, I
It's been a
appreciate your
joy.
time too. Yes.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to have a conversation, what would be neat is maybe next fall after the release of the book and anything else that's coming up this year yet. We could do a panel with the three of us and,
I've already been planning
yeah,
that panel discussion
actually
and
it would be four of us because Justin too. So,
well, so yeah, you, Joel, Justin,
and Jody.
Jody. Mhm.
Yeah, that
And
would be a
and
good
maybe
time.
we can even get Antonia in on that.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
She's a remarkable, amazing woman.
Yes.
Also
So,
working on an amazing book. So,
well, I've always thought about writing one, but who would believe it? So, yeah.
yeah.
So call it the Fugazi, which is Italian for fraud or fake.
Oh,
Because I always thought my life was a fraud all up, I'm bouncing from one thing to the next. And, it is what it is. But come to find out it's not a fraud. It's me in survival mode for a lot of years.
yeah. Yeah. And you just had not stepped into that
Right.
which you were meant to do.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Anyway.
that does kind of tie into imposter syndrome, which a lot of people feel like they have.
Mhm.
And yeah, and that mask of normalcy and that internal questioning, what's wrong with me?
Yes, very much so.
Why can't I start my first job in my lifelong career?
Right.
Right? Like other people do. Yeah, nobody
Mhm.
does that.
No. Mm-mm. Coming out of college, you need to be paid the big bucks because you're the expert and you know everything there is to know. And then you get to that first job and find out you know absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when my nephew was, I don't know, 12 or 13, telling me that by the time he was 18, he was going to have more money than Bill Gates. So, okay, righto.
That's a good goal to have.
Dream big. Go
Yeah,
big or go home.
yeah, dream big. Yeah, go big or go home. Yep, exactly.
Yep.
So, well, I
Carl,
appreciate you. Thank you for your time and thank you for bringing awareness to the FASD.
oh, it is my pleasure. I too have been bitten by that passion bug.
Yeah,
So,
yes.
oh, everyone, it's so hard to believe another episode is wrapped up already. So, if you want, since I will be having Carl back again, if you want to send me questions that you have for him to answer, you can do so by emailing me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. You can please remember everyone to like and subscribe, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast. But I appreciate you. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next week on Living with FASD. Bye
Live
for
long and
now.
prosper.
Yes.
Thank you.